Ladies and gentlemen, we inhabit a world where stability is merely a fragile veneer atop a turbulent ocean of chaos. And the burden of those who hold national office is not to dream of a utopia, but to ensure that this ice does not shatter under the weight of strategic miscalculation. When I look at the situation in the Gulf today, particularly the frantic developments surrounding Washington's decision on whether to strike Iran, I see a geopolitical picture far more complex than the headlines would have you believe. For history has taught me that war rarely begins with a single decision, but is the result of a chain of uncontrollable events. And what we are witnessing is the desperate attempt of regional allies to stop the first domino from falling. We must look straight at the unvarnished truth that the very nations once considered the United States closest partners in the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and Oman, have had to launch a last-minute lobbying campaign, a high-stakes backstage diplomatic effort to persuade President Trump to hold his fire moments before the order could be given, not because they harbor any affection for the regime in Tehran, but because they foresee the prospect of a major and intractable conflict that would engulf them all in flames. The hesitation and intervention of these allies do not stem from benevolence or a shift in strategic ideology, but rather from the core survival instinct of any nation standing in the crosshairs of enemy fire, where the cost of total war far outweighs any short-term political gain. Look at the actions of Saudi Arabia, a long-standing security partner whose reticence has reached such a level that they bluntly refuse to allow the United States to use their airspace to mount any attacks against Iran, a move that, viewed from a purely military perspective, is a severe blow to the deployment and logistical capabilities of any air campaign, yet viewed from Riyadh's perspective, is the only choice to protect themselves from retaliation.
Discussions are continuing without pause, as the Saudi foreign minister, Prince Faisal bin Farhan, has had to confer repeatedly by phone with his counterparts from Iran, Oman, and Turkey,
creating an emergency diplomatic network designed to cool the hotheads of all parties involved, because they understand that once the missiles start flying, diplomacy dies. And when diplomacy dies, chaos ascends to the throne in a region that has already seen too much suffering. We must also rigorously analyze the current political standing of Iran, a nation that remains politically apart from the Gulf states, partly due to its continued support for a weakened network of regional proxies known as the Axis of Resistance, along with its refusal to back a two-state solution for Palestine, as well as persistent disputes over 3 islands in the Gulf claimed by the United Arab Emirates, a claim strongly backed by the Gulf Cooperation Council. However, in this world full of paradoxes, we are seeing an astonishing shift as Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi has undertaken a series of visits to Arab capitals, trips that are said to have significantly improved relations that had long been frozen, indicating a shrewd tactical pivot by Tehran as they realize that total isolation is the road to ruin. Just last year, Mr. Araghchi visited Bahrain, becoming the first Iranian minister to do so since 2010, and he also visited Cairo 4 times in a single year in a tireless effort to mend diplomatic rifts, a noteworthy endeavor between 2 nations that had severed diplomatic relations in 2016. The relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran, once considered the most fraught and dangerous in the Middle East, has been on a recovery path for 3 years, a transformation that, if we turn back the clock a decade, no intelligence analyst would have dared to believe was possible. The images of Mr. Araghchi making a point of being photographed sampling local cuisine in the Arab capitals he visits are not merely trivial details, but a sophisticated political message, a signal of integration and a desire for peaceful coexistence that Tehran wants to send to its neighbors, aiming to construct a softer, more acceptable image in the eyes of the Arab public. All the Gulf states are acutely aware of the disruption Iran could cause to maritime traffic in the region, an economic lifeline not just for them, but for the entire world. And it is the fear of the choking of these strategic straits that has become the driving force pushing them toward diplomatic solutions rather than military confrontation, because they know that once the flow of oil stops, their economies will collapse faster than any political regime. A notable point in Iran's recent diplomatic strategy is Mr. Araghchi's attempt to persuade the Gulf states that Iran is actually less of a risk to global stability than Israel, an argument that may sound counterintuitive but has become more plausible than ever following Israel's bombing of Doha last September with the intent to kill Hamas negotiators who had lived in the Qatari capital for nearly a decade. This incident is a clear testament to the unpredictability and recklessness of Israeli military actions, as they were willing to conduct attacks right on the soil of a mediator state, disregarding diplomatic norms and the safety of civilians. And although the Israelis failed to hit their primary targets, reports indicate they killed 5 lower-ranking members of the group, causing significant outrage within the Qatari leadership. The United States, in this ironic situation, was not informed in advance of the strikes, forcing Washington to offer a direct apology to Qatar's emir and provide new security guarantees for Doha designed specifically to protect Qatar from further attacks by America's own closest ally, Israel, a diplomatic embarrassment that reveals the fractures in the alliance and the decline of Washington's control over its partners. At that time, Qatar publicly accused Israel of trying to sabotage every opportunity for peace in the region, a stinging accusation reflecting Doha's extreme frustration with Tel Aviv's conduct, and this has further bolstered Qatar's credibility in its self-appointed but often effective role as a global mediator, a role that U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has also supported. The presence of the U.S. Al Udeid Air Base, the largest in the region, right in Qatar, which was once seen as a symbol of American power and security commitment, has now become a critical vulnerability as tensions mount, forcing the U.S. to withdraw key personnel from the base this past Wednesday as a risk mitigation measure. This withdrawal coming right after Tehran's open threats to hit U.S. bases in the region if attacked, underscores a painful strategic reality that static American land and naval bases designed to project power can also become sources of vulnerability, turning into giant hostages sitting in the crosshairs of enemy missiles. Iran persists with the claim that the U.S. Ordered Israel to end its 12-day assault in the summer on Iran's leadership and nuclear program after Iran struck the U.S. Base, a narrative spun by Tehran to bolster its deterrence posture and sow doubt in the U.S. Israel relationship. Foreign Minister Araghchi has also managed to exploit the political capital he has invested in diplomatic outreach by ringing Arab leaders to explain Tehran's rationale for the crackdown, framing these actions as legitimate defensive measures in the eyes of regional partners. Although many of these states deeply resent the interference of Iranian proxy forces in Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen, they are forced to set aside those grievances in the face of a much larger fear, which is the collapse of the current order. The harsh reality is that few of the states in the region would welcome the example of an authoritarian regime being toppled by street protests, riled by falling living standards, leading to a new democratic transition, or even the fragmentation of a unified Iranian state, because that scenario threatens not only Iran, but the very survival of the monarchies and military governments in the Gulf. Look at Saudi Arabia, for instance, which has recently put down a rebellion in the south of Yemen that would have broken up the country. Or look at the Egyptian military leadership dedicating much of its energy to suppressing calls for human rights reforms. They all understand that instability is a contagious disease, and they do not want the pathogen of democracy or chaos from Iran spreading to their own backyards. The spokesperson for Qatar's foreign ministry, Majed Al Ansari, told reporters on Tuesday that the big challenges in the region, including internal and external challenges in different countries, require all of us to return to the negotiating table, a call grounded in pragmatism rather than confrontation. The Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has also called for dialogue, expressing hope that the United States and Iran will resolve this issue among themselves, whether through mediators, other actors, or direct dialogue, asserting that Ankara is closely following these developments. This indicates a rare consensus among regional powers that war is not the solution, and U.S. military intervention at this moment is not welcome, not because they cherish Iran, but because they fear the consequences of an uncontrolled collapse, a bloody lesson they have learned from wars and interventions in the past. We must view this issue not through the lens of morality or idealism, but through the lens of national interest and regional stability, where sometimes maintaining a stable adversary is preferable to facing a chaotic power vacuum. And that is the essence of the realism we must grasp on this geopolitical chessboard full of traps. To understand the urgency of the situation more deeply, we must dissect the fragile security architecture the United States has built in the Middle East over decades, a structure currently being severely tested by ceaseless geopolitical shifts. The withdrawal of key personnel from the Al Udeid base is not merely a technical measure or routine rotation, but a red alert, a tacit admission that the American security umbrella is not as impenetrable as we often mistakenly believe. And that in the era of precision ballistic missiles and drones, geographic distance is no longer an absolute shield. The event of Israel bombing Doha, a capital playing a central role in diplomatic efforts without any prior notice to Washington, has exposed a serious gap in intelligence sharing and strategic coordination between allies, raising major questions about the level of trust and the U.S. Ability to control the unilateral actions of Israel. We are witnessing a spectacular reversal where Arab nations, instead of relying entirely on U.S. protection to confront Iran, are proactively seeking their own communication channels with Tehran to protect themselves, creating a decentralized security network where Washington's role is gradually being overshadowed by local interest calculations. The rise of the shuttle diplomacy Mr. Arakchi is conducting is not just a stalling tactic, but reflects a profound change in Iran's strategic thinking, moving from direct confrontation to an interlocking defense, tying Iran's safety to the general safety of the region, ensuring that any attack on them would cause unacceptable damage to their neighbors. This is a strategy of hostage taking at a geopolitical level where the economy and stability of the Gulf are tightly bound to the survival of the regime in Tehran, creating an invisible but incredibly powerful drag on any military decision from the White House. We cannot ignore the psychological factor of Gulf leaders who are haunted by the specter of the Arab Spring, the fear that democratization or the chaotic collapse of a neighboring regime will trigger potential unrest within their own societies, where internal contradictions still smolder beneath the veneer of prosperity. Therefore, maintaining the status quo, even if it is a status quo full of inadequacies and tensions, is still seen as a safer option than opening the Pandora's box of regime change, a gamble where no one can be certain they will be the last one standing. When we analyze deeper into Saudi Arabia's move to refuse airspace, we must understand that this is not just a military decision, but a stark political statement about sovereignty and independence in strategic decision making, marking the end of the era where the United States could freely use the territory of allies as a military launchpad without concern for the political consequences for the host country. Riyadh understands that if they allow the U.S. to use their airspace to attack Iran, they will immediately become a prime target for retaliation. And with vital oil infrastructure sitting within range of Iranian missiles, the price to pay would be the paralysis of the national economy, a risk no sane leader would accept. This shift forces strategic planners at the Pentagon to recalculate all operational plans, moving from lightning strike scenarios based on forward bases to more complex, costly, and risky options based on naval forces and long range aviation, significantly reducing the deterrence and rapid response capabilities of the U.S. military in the region. At the same time, we must recognize the roles of Qatar and Turkey not merely as outside observers, but as active agents trying to reshape the regional order toward a multipolar direction where the balance of power no longer depends entirely on the will of Washington or Tehran, but relies on a network of intertwined interests. Qatar's call to return to the negotiating table or Turkey's proposal for dialogue are not empty words, but a reflection of the reality that in today's flat and interconnected world, security is not a zero-sum game, but a collective effort requiring compromise and mutual understanding. Ultimately, what we need to do is not to seek the destruction of the enemy at all costs, but to manage the conflict, keep it within controllable limits, and seek even the smallest common spaces to build trust, because the alternative to diplomacy is not victory, but mutual destruction, an outcome that no one from Washington to Tehran, from Riyadh to Ankara, wishes to see occur. That is why, no matter how loudly the war drums beat, the voice of reason and prudence must still be heard and respected as a final break before the chariot of history plunges into the abyss. In the context of escalating tensions, we cannot fail to mention a factor often overlooked but carrying the weight of 1,000 tons, which is the exhaustion of nations in the region with endless conflicts, a fatigue that has seeped into the psyche of both the leadership and the common people, making any call for war sound alienated and terrifying. The Gulf states, after decades of witnessing devastation in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Libya, have realized that military intervention from the outside rarely brings peace or democracy, but often leaves deep scars that cannot heal, and they do not want to become the next victims of the misguided geopolitical calculations of great powers. Iran's proactive improvement of relations with Egypt, a traditional Arab power, is also a strategic move to break the siege of isolation, creating a new axis of relations capable of counterbalancing the influence of Israel and the West, while opening up new economic and security cooperation opportunities that previously did not exist. We are witnessing the formation of a new regional order, where alliances are no longer based rigidly on ideology or religion, but on pragmatic interest calculations, where yesterday's enemy can become today's partner if it serves the goal of survival and development. The presence of Iranian proxy forces in the region although a thorn in the side of many Arab nations, is also viewed as a reality that cannot be erased overnight. And solving this problem requires a long and patient negotiation process, not one that can be solved by bombs or unilateral sanctions. Even the United States, with its superior military power, has had to admit its limits in shaping political outcomes in the Middle East. And the recent troop withdrawals or adjustments are a testament to the shift in strategic focus from direct intervention to remote support and preventative diplomacy. We must understand that in the modern world, power is not only measured by the number of aircraft carriers or missiles, but also by the ability to build alliances, maintain stability, and prevent conflict. Skills that sometimes require more patience and humility than the display of muscular strength. The current crisis is also a stern test of United States leadership, raising the question of whether Washington still has enough credibility and capacity to play the role of arbiter in the region, or if it is gradually being pushed to the sidelines by the internal dynamics of the region itself. The Gulf states, by stepping up to lobby and negotiate on their own, have sent a clear message that they no longer wish to entrust their destiny to decisions made in a capital thousands of miles away, but want to seize the right to self-determination, even if that means going against the wishes of their greatest ally. This requires the United States to adopt a new approach, more subtle and respectful toward its partners, listening to their legitimate security concerns and working together to find sustainable solutions rather than imposing top-down edicts. Only when we accept this multipolar and multidimensional reality can we hope to build a solid regional security architecture where peace is not a temporary pause between two wars, but a new normal cultivated by mutual understanding and respect. Look at how diplomacy is operating in these dark hours. It is not about lavish banquets or ceremonial handshakes, but midnight phone calls, ceaseless shuttle flights, and tacit messages exchanged through back channels where every word is weighed carefully to avoid fatal misunderstandings. The restraint that President Trump has shown, whether due to pressure from allies or his own recalculation, is a welcome signal that reason still has a place in the Oval Office, and that even the toughest leaders must pause before the prospect of irreversible disaster. However, this restraint is only temporary, and without subsequent diplomatic steps to resolve the root causes of the contradictions, the risk of conflict explosion remains ever present like a ticking time bomb, ready to detonate at any moment if a single spark accidentally falls. Our responsibility as observers and analysts is not to blindly cheer for war or peace, but to provide the deepest, most multidimensional, and honest insights into the situation, helping the public and policymakers clearly understand the price to be paid for every decision. We must always remind ourselves that behind the statistics, the military maps, and the strategic calculations are the lives of millions of innocent people who will be the first and most painful victims of any war, and it is for them that we are not allowed to err, not allowed to let arrogance or ignorance lead the way. History will judge us not by what we destroyed, but by what we preserved, and in this moment, the most precious thing to preserve is the chance for peace, no matter how fragile and small that chance may be. That is the mission, the burden, and the glory of true politicians, soldiers, and diplomats who strive day and night to keep this world from sliding into the eternal darkness of war and hatred. Looking back at this entire picture, I want to emphasize one thing. The stability we are seeing, or rather, the absence of large-scale war at this moment is not a given, but the result of a balance of terror, a collective psychological state where the fear of destruction has outweighed the desire for domination. Iran, with all its internal problems and international isolation, remains a nation with deep history and culture, a people with high self-esteem, and backing them into a corner is never a good idea, because history has proven that a wounded beast is often infinitely more dangerous than a healthy one. The neighboring Arab nations understand this better than anyone, for they have lived beside Iran for thousands of years, sharing the same geographic space, the same turbulent history, and they know that the only way to survive is to find a way to coexist, even if it is a coexistence full of suspicion and vigilance. Therefore, the road ahead is not one paved with rose petals, but a road rough with gravel, requiring the patience, courage, and wisdom of all parties involved to overcome prejudices, old hatreds, and short-term calculations, moving toward a more stable, safer future for both the region and the world. We cannot change the past, but we can shape the future through today's actions. And I hope that the leaders will have enough clarity to choose the path of dialogue over confrontation, cooperation over conflict, to bring true peace to this turbulent Gulf region. That is the final message I wish to send to you. A message of realism, but also full of hope, because even in the darkest moments, the light of reason and humanity still has a chance to shine if we know how to kindle and nurture it.